Why hello there beautiful people, this is Nelson Bullock aka Kaz Cray, and welcome to my hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Emerald using only water types. The rules of the run will be in the description, but to keep it simple, any Pokemon that I catch, if it faints, it's considered dead and I can't use it for the rest of the run. I can only catch the first water type Pokemon on each route, and I have to nickname all of my Pokemon. The hardcore Nuzlocke rules are no items in battle, although you can use held items, no leveling past the next gym leader or Drake's Salamence, and I have to play on set mode. I also play with species clause, meaning I can only catch one Pokemon of a specific species, which affects me in this run because I'll only be able to catch one Clamperl, meaning I have to pick between either Huntail or Gorbis. Well, I can't even evolve in the run anyway, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Water types are amongst the most abundant in any Pokemon game, but especially the early ones, and considering this was the series that was given a 7.8 out of 10 for too much water, although it was really Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but you get the point. There will be a lot of encounters here, which is great for a rookie Nuzlocker like me. Let's get into the run. My starter ends up being a Mudkip, who is an actual starter in this game, who I nicknamed Shepard. And the nickname theme is indeed Mass Effect. Shepard ends up being an adamant nature, which is plus attack minus special attack, which isn't great for its water moveset, but for the ground moves, it'll be perfect once Shepard evolves into a Marshtomp. My first battle of the run is going to be against May and her Trico, which is really easy to take care of since Trico doesn't know Absorb yet. My first encounter after Mudkip is going to be a Wingull, who I end up nicknaming Ashley. She'll be really important for the second gym battle against Brawly, but we don't like space races on this team. My next encounter ends up being a Lotad on the very next route, who I end up nicknaming Dr. Chakwas, or just Chakwas. Ashley ends up being a Jolly nature, which is plus speed minus special attack, which isn't great for the water typing, but the plus speed is great for flying attacks. Chakwas ends up being a Lonely nature, which is plus attack minus defense. Isn't great, but isn't horrible, and I don't utilize Swift Swim nearly enough in this playthrough, just letting you guys know ahead of time. On my next route, I end up catching a Meryl, who I nicknamed Liara. She ends up having a Hardy nature, which is neutral, but she has the ability Huge Power, which raises her attack. And Huge Power is way better than Thick Fat, which would have been the alternative. Before my first gym battle, I evolved Chakwas into a Lombre. And then I have my first battle against Roxanne, who is the Rock-type gym leader. I ended up spinning a wheel to see who'd take this battle, and I landed on Chakwas, and Chakwas just blows through her entire team with Bullet Seed. She did get hit with a Rock Tomb, but that's really all Roxanne did, outside of trying to heal her nose pass up multiple times. But this is just never going to be a hard battle unless you decide you just want to go with a Wingull into this battle. But that's Roxanne defeated, we get our first badge. Now, the battle against May in Rustboro City is completely optional, but I decided to just do it just because. I lead Liara against her Wingull, and I go with Defense Curl to start off, just to increase the power rollout. And after taking a really light wing attack and a light water gun, Liara goes for a rollout, which one-shots Wingull. Out comes her Trico that knows Absorb at this point, and a crit would have killed Liara, but luckily Liara misses her second rollout, so I switch into Ashley on another Absorb and then hit two wing attacks, taking a Leer all the while, and May is defeated. Now, just so you guys know, I do catch a Slack Off here, just to be an HM Mon. So if you see multiple Mons that you didn't see me catch before, that's why. I end up fishing up my next encounter in Dewford Town, a Magikarp who I nicknamed Garrus, and Garrus Vicarian is by far one of my favorite video game characters, and definitely my favorite character in Mass Effect. Garrus ends up being a Serious nature, which is completely neutral, and while Gyarados is an absolutely cracked Nuzlocke Mon, I'm still going to use him. Even though I know a lot of Nuzlockers don't like using Gyarados because it makes the run too easy, but let me know in the future if you guys want to see me not use Gyarados in future runs. I'll at least consider it. Before the next gym battle, I evolve Liara into an Azumarill, and then I evolve Shepard into a Marshtomp as well. Before we get into this battle with Brawly, I just want to admit something to you guys right now. Just for full disclosure, this is actually my second attempt at this run. In my first attempt, I actually beat Brawly, but his Makuhita got a really lucky crit against my Wingull in the first run, and then when I sent out my Marshtomp, I just didn't do enough EV training, and I wasn't doing enough damage with my attacking moves, and my Marshtomp essentially got taken out by his Makuhita. I did end up beating Brawly eventually, but Watson, the next gym leader, is damn near impossible to beat without a Marshtomp in this type of run, without a whole lot of luck, and I just decided not even to risk trying to do it as to avoid wasting time. So I restarted the run, but this time around, his team is pretty easy to take care of here, as I actually did focus EV training for the most part, and actually was able to blow through his Machop. And as you can see, his Meditite goes for a Focus Punch here, but as long as I keep attacking, Meditite is not a threat at all, and a simple Water Gun is able to take him down. I don't even think the crit mattered there, but last but certainly not least is Brawly's Makuhita, which of course caused me to restart the run, and I immediately go for a Growl, knowing that Makuhita is going to go for a Bulk Up, which sure enough he ends up doing, but now it's just plus defense at this point. And then I go for another Growl to make sure his attack doesn't get too high. And then Makuhita starts going for Vital Throw. Ashley heals up all the damage from that Vital Throw with an Oran Berry, so now we're safe to even a critical hit. And then Ashley hits a Wing Attack on Makuhita to do pretty decent damage. And then Makuhita goes for another Vital Throw doing 10 damage once again. I'm at risk to a crit here, so I switch Ashley out in favor of Liara, who I completely forgot to heal, but it doesn't really matter as Makuhita is not going to do enough damage to her anyways. She goes for a Defense Curl after tanking a Vital Throw, and then tanks yet another one. She's really safe to any type of critical hits, even 2 of them here, as she goes for a Rollout, which is resisted, but then Makuhita goes for another Vital Throw that's even more resisted than the last one, and then his Berry ends up proccing, nearly healing him up to full health. And as long as Rollout keeps hitting, Liara is all good, and she does keep hitting, finally taking out Makuhita after being brought down to 25 health. And that's our second gym badge, ladies and gentlemen. Skipping through the Slateport City shenanigans, I end up evolving Gyarados into a Gyarados right before the battle with May on Route 110. And this battle is a notorious run-ender, but I feel like I have a good enough team to not even lose a Mon against her. Famous last words, though. It's really famous last words because I absolutely foobarred and forgot that she leads with Wingull and not Slugma. So now I have to switch into Gyarados and my plan's completely screwed now. Gyarados does get an Intimidate on Wingull, but then Wingull claps back with a Growl to do the same to Gyarados. Gyarados then hits a Bite on Wingull that does exactly half, and Wingull attacks with a Wing Attack that does paltry damage before Gyarados takes out the Wingull with a final Bite that had an unnecessary crit. Out comes Slugma next, and I probably could leave Gyarados in, but I decided to switch to Shepherd, who comes in on a Rock Throw that does damn near nothing. Shepherd then hits a Mud Shot on Slugma, and that ends up one-shotting it. And out comes Grovyle next. So now I switch Shepherd out for Ashley, and Ashley should be able to clean up this Grovyle, right? Well, Grovyle goes for Absorb that does 12 damage, and I'm really just chilling at this point, at least I think. Grovyle goes for Pursuit then, and it brings Ashley down to below half before a Wing Attack takes Grovyle down well below half. But then Grovyle goes for an Absorb, and it crits, taking Ashley out and giving us our first death of the run. I've watched way too much Flygon HG over the past year for me to not always play around a critical hit when I can. Gyarados comes out next, and Gyarados is going to be able to clean up this battle for me at this point. Gyarados just starts hitting Grovyle with a bunch of bites, taking a Pursuit and some Absorbs in return, but eventually Gyarados is able to finally do enough damage to take this thing out. Luckily I lost Wingull after I already defeated Brawly because Pelipper really isn't even close to the type of water flying mon that Gyarados is, so in the grand scheme of things she's not a huge loss, and we don't like space racists anyways, so it is what it is. Our next semi-major battle is against Wally, but we really don't need to talk about that. After that, we do have another major battle against Watson, which I talked about earlier. But Shepherd's alive and well in this run, so I don't really have to worry about too much. Although Voltorb does go for a rollout, They only bring Shepard down to a nice 69 before getting clapped with a mud shot. Next up for Watson is Electrike, and I'm really not worried about this little boy either, as he goes for a Howl to start things off, but then Shepard claps right back with yet another mud shot, getting yet another one shot. Next up is Magnuson, which does outspeed Shepard, and it hits him with a Sonic Boom, but then Shepard claps back with another mud shot, this time being 4 times effective, wiping out the Magneton very easily. Shepard now does out level Watson's ace Manectric, but that's completely fine as level caps only apply at the beginning of the battle as Manectric goes for a Howl, as Shepard claps back with a mud shot, which brings Manectric down to the red and lowers its speed, so now Watson will most likely heal here. Or so I thought, but Manectric was holding a Citrus Berry which gets him back to the green, but it doesn't matter as one more mud shot will take this thing out. He does hit a quick attack, but Shepard's mud shot is just way too strong as Manectric goes down, and that's badge number 3. Our next battle is going to be against Maxie on top of Mount Chimney, and this battle is actually not too difficult at all. Maxie ends up leading with his Mightyena, and I lead Chakwas into this battle. Chakwas hits Mightyena with a fake out to open things up just to get a little chip. I did forget to heal her up before this battle, as Mightyena hits a pretty decent bite, as Chakwas responds with a Bullet Seed that ends up hitting Mightyena twice. She's not doing enough damage into him, so I decide to switch into Garrus, and Garrus comes in and intimidates Mightyena, dropping the attack a little bit as Bite comes in and really doesn't do much at all. Garrus then responds with a Dragon Rage that does 40 points every time it hits, as Mightyena responds with another Bite, and Maxie heals with a Super Potion. Garrus once again hits Dragon Rage on Mightyena, taking him back down to the yellow, and then on the very next turn, Garrus hits yet another Dragon Rage to take out the Mightyena. Next up for Maxie is his Zubat, but again, Garrus is able to hit Dragon Rage on Zubat this time, as Zubat responds with a Wing Attack that does very little damage. Garrus responds with yet another Dragon Rage, and Zubat is good as gone. Last out for Maxie is Camerupt, so I decided to switch Garrus out into Liara, and Camerupt just goes for Focus Energy, as Liara hits a 4 times effective Bubble Beam that doesn't quite kill Camerupt as it takes him down all the way into the red, and then Camerupt just goes for Tackle, which does end up critting, but it really doesn't do much at all as Maxie goes to a Super Potion this time, as Liara fires out one more Bubble Beam to take down Camerupt and win us our first battle against Maxie. That really wasn't too big of an issue at all, and even less of an issue is going to be Flannery being a Fire-type gym leader. Shepard's able to blow through her Numel and her Slugma with water guns, as Slugma ends up hitting a Smog that does very little damage and doesn't even poison Shepard, as he hits 2 more water guns on Slugma after a potion to take it down. Next up, however, is Camerupt, and Camerupt gets hit with a 4 times effective water gun as well, but she survives and then hits Shepard with an Attract. Shepard simps for Camerupt for 3 straight turns while Camerupt just lays into him with some tackles, so I have to switch out into Liara, who can't be attracted, and she gets hit with a really light tackle, and then I go for Bubble Beam to take Camerupt down. And now Flannery's last Pokemon is Torkoal, but Liara basically just trades Bubble Beams with Torkoal's Body Slams, and somehow Liara manages not to get paralyzed once or crit, and she's able to take down Torkoal with 3 Bubble Beams, and we've won our 4th gym badge. For badge number 5, we go back to Petalburg Gym to take on Norman, our in-game dad, who is very inferior to my father IRL. Norman ends up leading out with his Spinda, and I lead out with Liara, and I have a very intricate plan here. Liara goes for Defense Curl on turn number 1, and Spinda's most likely going to go for Teeter Dance, which he ends up doing. And I completely forgot to give Liara a Person Berry. This should go swimmingly. On the very next turn, Liara hits herself in Confusion, which brings her down to 99 health, and then Spinda goes for a Facade, doing 12 damage. Liara is still confused here, but this time she's able to get off a rollout, and this is all part of the plan of me going for a Defense Curl in the first turn, as Spinda goes for another light Facade. Liara is confused on turn number 3, but she hits yet another rollout to take out Spinda. And next out for Norman is this Vigoroth, who hits a Facade, as Liara beats Confusion for a third straight time for another rollout kill. Next up is Lanoon, who hits a Slash that doesn't crit. Liara is finally not confused as Lanoon goes down to another rollout. And last but certainly not least is Slaking, but Liara outspeeds Slaking, hits another rollout, and we've swept Norman with Liara. So now we get another encounter here, and it's going to be a very familiar encounter. It's Tentacruel, and this time I name him Caden. And if he's anything like Undyne was in my last playthrough, he's going to be an absolute stud. Caden, however, has the ability Liquid Ooze instead of Clear Body. Liquid Ooze basically turns any draining move into a damaging move for the opponent instead of a healing move. Caden's a gentle nature, which is plus special defense and minus defense, which could be worse, considering Tentacruel is more of a special sweeper anyways, but I would have loved a plus speed nature here. On Route 118, we end up fishing up a Carvana, who I end up nicknaming Tolly. She ends up being an adamant nature, which is plus attack and minus special attack, which isn't great for any of her stab moves, but she has the Rough Skin ability, which means any physical contact with her and our opponents will be hurt. I go back to Petalburg City to get our next encounter, which is a Goldeen who I nicknamed Jacob, and Goldeen is a pretty mid Pokemon, so I'm only going to be using Jacob if I absolutely have to. He's a lax nature, plus defense and minus special defense, so I really don't need him at all. Before our next gym battle, we end up evolving Caden into a Tentacruel, and then we battle Shelly at the Weather Institute, but this battle is really easy outside of Mightyena swaggering a few of our Pokemon. We end up getting a Castform for our troubles, and while Castform does turn into a water type when Rain is active, I don't feel right using this as an encounter, so we end up just putting Blob in the HM box. Right before my battle with May, I end up evolving Tolly into a Sharpedo, and Sharpedo is a very strong physical sweeper. But now is another battle with May, and I believe this is the final one of the game as well, as she still doesn't have a fully evolved Sceptile quite yet, so this battle should be relatively easy even without Ashley on the team. She leads out with Slugma, and I lead out with Tolly, who hits Slugma with a Surf that's able to one-shot it. She brings out Grovyle as planned next, and I switch Tolly into Garrus just to get an Intimidate off, as it drops Grovyle's attack just a bit. Grovyle goes for a Leaf Blade, as Garrus is able to tank it due to having a flying typing. After that, I decide to go with a Dragon Rage from Garrus into Grovyle that ends up doing just about half, as Grovyle just goes for a Screech, and then Garrus is able to finish off Grovyle with yet another Dragon Rage. Dragon Rage is such a great move even after you get to a certain level. May sends out her Lombre last, and this is relatively easy to deal with as I switch Caden in on a Fake Out that really doesn't do too much damage at all. Caden responds with a critical hit acid that takes her down in just one shot, and that's May defeated in the final battle against our rival. Next up is our gym battle against Winona, and usually she can be kind of problematic, but for the most part we have a good enough team to be able to not have anybody get lost in this one. She leads out with her Swablu, and I lead out with Caden, who goes for an Ice Beam that takes Swablu all the way down to the red. Swablu ends up going for Perish Song here, however, so now Caden's in a little bit of trouble. Winona ends up healing with a Hyper Potion, as Caden ends up going for an Acid on Swablu that does pretty feeble damage. The Perish count fell to 2 for both Pokemon here, as Caden goes for yet another Ice Beam to try to take Swablu out, and it does. Next out for Winona is Swablu's evolved form Altaria, as Caden's Perish count falls to 1, and I have to switch him out if I don't want to lose him. Garrus comes in and intimidates Altaria, as she just ends up going for a Dragon Dance and getting 2 of them off to boot. Garrus hits a really light Thunderbolt, and then a Dragon Rage after another Dragon Dance, and now Altaria is starting to go for Aerial Ace, but then she goes for another Dragon Dance, so I just take her out with another Dragon Rage. That was pretty easy, as Winona brings out her Tropius, I end up switching over to Caden once again, and Caden's able to tank an Aerial Ace pretty decently, and then goes for a 4 times effective Ice Beam to one-shot Tropius. Next up for Winona is Skarmory, and this is probably the only Pokemon that she has that's even remotely difficult. Caden hits an Ice Beam that does decent amount of damage, as Skarmory goes for an aerial ace to take Caden to half, so I have to switch Tolly in, and Tolly gets hit for a third with another aerial ace. Rough Skin does do a little damage to Skarmory as Tolly hits a Rock Tomb next, which does lower the speed of Skarmory, but doesn't do too much damage, as Skarmory hits back with an aerial ace that may have killed Tolly if it would have crit, but I thought Rock Tomb would do more damage than that, so I switch in Liara now, as Skarmory hits a very light aerial ace that barely hurts my big fluffy bunny. As Liara goes for a defense curl to boost up rollout a little bit, Skarmory goes for another aerial ace that does even less, and now Liara goes for rollout to take Skarmory into the red as she hits another aerial ace. Now Winona ends up healing Skarmory with a Hyper Potion, but it's too late as Liara is already getting going with rollout, and the second one ends up taking Skarmory all the way down just above half, and the third one is able to take Skarmory out. And her final Pokemon is Pelipper, but Liara outspeeds, and she's able to hit one last rollout to end the battle and get us yet another badge, our 6th out of 8. Between the 6th and 7th badges, Shepard ends up evolving into Swampert, who's an absolute offensive monster. Before our 7th gym battle, we have to take on Maxie for a second time at Mount Chimney, this time on the inside after he wakes up Groudon, and he leads out with his Mightyena once again, and this time I lead out with Garrus, as both Intimidators just lower each other's attack real quick. Garrus ends up going for a T-Bolt on Mightyena, which ends up not doing as much damage as I thought it would, but it does get the paralysis on Mightyena, as he ends up going for a Scary Face to drop our speed harshly. Garrus then responds with a Stab Surf, and that ends up taking Mightyena all the way into the deep yellow as he ends up going for yet another Scary Face to drop our speed. Maxie ends up going for a Super Potion to heal up Mightyena back into the green as Garrus hits yet another Surf to take Mightyena down to the yellow once again. One more Surf's enough to take out Mightyena, and next up for Mr. Maxie is going to be his Camerupt. And thanks to the Scary Face speed drops, Camerupt ends up outspeeding Garrus to hit an Amnesia, which sharply raises his special defense so that Garrus' incoming Surf no longer kills in just one shot. Maxie ends up healing Camerupt with a Super Potion as Garrus fires off yet another Surf. And then Camerupt goes for a Rock Slide that if it would have hit and crit, Garrus would be taken out. Luckily he misses, so Garrus hits one more Surf, and that's one less to worry about. Last and certainly not least for Maxie is his Crobat, who ends up going for a Wing Attack that does a 4th to Garrus, and he ends up clapping back with a Thunderbolt that doesn't even do half to Crobat, and he responds with an Air Cutter to bring Garrus below half, and another T-Bolt ends up bringing Crobat all the way down into the deep yellow. But I already lost one Water Flying Mon to a crit. I'm not losing another one, so I switch into Caden, who ends up taking the Air Cutter for just over half. Then a Wing Attack brings Caden down to 27 HP before an Ice Beam finally takes out Crobat, though a crit would have taken down Caden at any point. That's Maxie 2 down. I do get a few more encounters here as I go to the Safari Zone and catch Zaid the Psyduck. And I go to Lily Cove City and catch Miranda the Whalemere, which was a big misplay, by the way. I found out after I caught the Whalemere that the only place you can get Staryu is by fishing off the coast of Lily Cove City with a Super Rod. So no Staryu for this playthrough, unfortunately. I do end up evolving Jacob into a Seaking, however, even though I have no plans to use him at all. And I evolve Zaid the Psyduck into a Golduck, and I actually plan on using him for the next battle, but I don't really plan on using Miranda, but I'm just going to evolve her as well into a Wailord. So next up is the double battle against Tate and Liza for the 7th gym badge, and this battle can be a little bit tricky if I misplay pretty much in the slightest. They lead with Xatu and Claydol, as I lead with Shepard and Tolly. Tolly outspeeds both Xatu and Claydol and hits a crunch on Claydol that does a ton of damage, and then Xatu sets up a Calm Mind, which is a little scary to say the very least, as that raises his special attack and special defense, as Shepard reams in with a Surf to take down Claydol, but it does really minimal damage to Xatu. Next out is Solrock, and Solrock is a little scary because of Sunny Day and Solar Beam, but Tali is able to crunch Solrock all the way down into the deep red as Xatu sets up a Sunny Day, which makes things very, very dicey. But Shepard outspeeds Solrock and is able to hit a Surf, even with it being resisted due to Sunny Day, and it takes down the Solrock, and again does even less damage to Xatu. Last and certainly not least for Tate and Liza is their Lunatone, and once again Tali goes for Crunch, this time on Xatu. That ends up taking Xatu all the way down to the red as Xatu goes for yet another Calm Mind, which is kind of head scratching. And then Shepard takes down Xatu with a takedown. So now it's a 2v1 against Lunatone, as Lunatone just ends up hitting a Psychic on Shepard that does less than half. I don't want to risk Shepard to a crit, so I end up switching Garrus in for him, as he ends up getting an attack drop to Lunatone. Not that it really matters, as Tali comes in with a Crunch that takes Lunatone all the way down into the yellow, as Lunatone responds with a Calm Mind. Lunatone then ends up healing, but then Tali is able to hit a Crunch, and Garrus hits a Bite to finish things off, and we've gotten our 7th gym badge just like that. Now we have another double battle against Maxie and Tabitha, which is a little scary since we're teaming up with Steven. Steven is a former champion, but at the same time, he's not exactly equipped to take on a team of fire users. Maxie sends up Mariana as Tabitha sends out her Camerupt. Steven ends up sending out his Metang as I lead with Shepard. Shepard outspeeds everybody and hits a Surf that takes out Camerupt in one shot and takes Mightyena down just above half. Tabitha sends out her Golbat up next as Mightyena ends up hitting Scary Face on Shepard to slow him down just a little bit. Metang just ends up going for a Light Screen, which I'm a little thankful for. Golbat then goes for a Confuse Ray on Shepard, which is a little worrisome. And then Mightyena ends up going for a Swagger towards Shepard as well, as Metang ends up going for a Metal Claw on Mightyena. That ends up taking him down to the yellow as Shepard hits a Surf through Confusion to take out Mightyena and do big damage to Golbat. Next up for Maxie is going to be his Camerupt, as Golbat ends up hitting a Wing Attack onto Shepard for decent enough damage. Not really good, to be honest with you, as Metang hits a Psychic on Golbat to take him down. And then Tabitha sends out her Mightyena for her final Pokemon that ends up getting an Intimidate on Shepard, but not on Metang, who is Clear Body. However, Camerupt hits a pretty big Earthquake that does big damage to Shepard and nearly just one-shots Metang. And it also does big damage to Tabitha's Mightyena. Shepard's able to hit another Surf through Confusion, which just straight up one-shots Camerupt, and then also takes down Mightyena as well. That takes Tabitha out of the equation, and now Maxie's down to his final Pokemon, a Crobat that outspeeds everybody on my team more or less. But I end up switching into Garrus, who ends up getting an Intimidate drop on Crobat, but then Crobat hits a Mean Look on Garrus, so there's no switching him out. But I'm not stuck in here with him, he's stuck in here with me as Metang hits a massive Psychic that takes Crobat all the way down to the yellow, as Crobat responds with a Confuse Ray onto Garrus for God knows what reason when Metang's the bigger threat. But I totally forgot that I put a Person Berry on Garrus just in case for the previous battle with Maxie, and that ends up proccing as Garrus is able to hit a Thunderbolt to take down Crobat and win us the battle. Now that I have the HM for Dive, I'm able to get a couple more encounters. First, the Relicanth, who I nicknamed Captain Anderson, and then I get a Clamperl, who I can't even evolve, but I nickname her Samara. Now I have one last battle against Team Aqua or Team Magma, a battle against Archie. He leads out with Mightyena, as I lead this one out with Garrus, and just like the second Maxie battle, these two just trade Intimidates. Garrus leads things off with a Thunderbolt that ends up doing pretty decent damage to Mightyena as he claps back with a Scary Face. His Mightyena now outspeeds and ends up hitting Garrus with a Swagger, and I'm all out of Person Berries, so I'm not going to be able to get him on him in this battle, as Garrus is now confused, and he ends up hitting himself in Confusion. Lovely. I end up switching Garrus back out into Shepard, and now Shepard ends up getting hit with a takedown that doesn't do too much damage at all. And then Shepard responds with a Mud Shot that ends up taking Mightyena all the way to the red before Mightyena hits another takedown. And now Mightyena ends up getting healed with a Super Potion as I go for another Mud Shot. And this one's able to take my Adiana completely out. No crit or anything like that. So next up is Crobat. And once again, this thing outspeeds everything on my team. And Crobat just goes for a Confuse Ray. And now Shepherd needs to not hit himself here, but he does. I love that for us. I end up switching him out and putting Garrus back into the battle, as Garrus is able to intimidate Crobat, which lightens up the wing attack just a bit, but Crobat gets 2 in a row, and then the second one crits as Garrus hits a Thunderbolt. But Garrus is at a risk for another crit here, so I have to switch him out, and who better to switch in than Liara? Archie ends up just using a super potion here, and now it's time to go back to the old shenanigans as Crobat hits a really light wing attack on Liara. She gets a defense curl up, and then Crobat goes for bite that only does 15 damage. I just decided to double up on defense curls, but then Crobat hits a third one, and this time we hit a rollout, and it does just over half to Crobat. And now Maxie ends up not healing here, and he goes for another Confuse Ray, but I need Liara to hit through it if I want any shot at winning this battle. And she is confused, but she's able to hit through with a rollout to take down the Crobat. Last and certainly not least for Archie is his Sharpedo, who isn't nearly as pretty as Tolly, and Sharpedo just goes for Taunt here. Liara falls for the taunt, and then while she's confused, she ends up hitting herself in confusion. This ends up being a really bad misplay by me as Sharpedo ends up hitting the slash. Liara snaps out of confusion and then hits a rollout, which does pretty good damage to Sharpedo, actually about half, but in Rough Skin procs. And honestly, as long as Sharpedo doesn't crit with a slash, we should be okay. So now, ladies and gentlemen, with that information, what do you think happens here? He crits with a slash. Liara is able to get a rollout to take out the Sharpedo, but rough skin damage is going to be enough to take down Liara, and we lose our second Mon of the run. It saddens me a whole lot because Liara was going to be one of the Mons I brought into the Elite Four with me, with rollout being a perfect answer to everything Glacia has. And unlike Ashley's space racist ass, Liara is actually one of my favorite characters in the Mass Effect series. So all in all bad. Rest well, Liara. We do end up defeating Archie, but now I'll forever have a grudge against this piece of garbage. Groudon's fighting a losing battle in the rain against Kyogre, so now I gotta go tell Rayquaza before Groudon gets absolutely blown back. And the Sky Noodle comes through and shuts the entire thing down. Now that I saved the world, it's time to get our 8th and final gym badge against Juan. And let me tell you folks, this battle made me want to reconsider doing the whole hardcore Nuzlocke thing. He leads with Love Disc and I lead with Garrus, who gets an Intimidate off. Then he hits a Thunderbolt on Love Disc, which does almost enough to kill, but Love Disc ends up missing a Sweet Kiss as Juan just uses his first Hyper Potion on Love Disc, which is really pointless, and Garrus hits another Thunderbolt that takes Love Disc all the way back down to the red. One more T-Bolt is enough to kill Love Disc, obviously. Next up for Juan is his Whiscash, and Garrus really doesn't have much he can hit this thing with, so I decided to make things easier and switch into Chakwas, who we haven't seen in quite a bit. Whiscash just hits a Rain Dance, and that activates Swift Swim for Chakwas, who ends up just hitting a Fake Out on turn number 1 to flinch Whiscash and get a little chip. On the very next turn, Chakwas hits a Giga Drain that takes Whiscash completely out. Next up for Juan is his Celio, which threatens with Aurora Beam, so I have to switch Chakwas out. So I go into Shepherd, and Celio just ends up going for a Body Slam that, thank the Lord, did not paralyze. On the next turn, Shepherd goes for a Mud Shot, which should be neutral to Celio, and it drops his speed as well, as Celio goes for a Water Pulse that doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it does get a Confusion on Shepherd. So now I have to switch him back out, and this time I go into Caden, as Celio hits an absolutely laughable Aurora Beam on Caden. But it's not so funny when you realize that Caden really doesn't have anything that it hits Celio hard with. And then another Body Slam does big damage as I switch Saeed in. Saeed gets hit with a Body Slam as he comes in, goes for a Disable and misses. So then Celio hits another Body Slam, and now Saeed's paralyzed. Celio outspeeds and hits yet another Body Slam, and Saeed misses a Screech now. I mean, you can't get any worse RNG than that. His Citrus Berry does proc to get him back up to 92 health, but then another Body Slam crits as Zaid finally hits a Screech. So now at this point, I'm pretty okay with sacrificing Zaid as another Body Slam hits, and he misses another Disable. Celio hits another Body Slam, and then Zaid misses a third Disable and a fourth move overall. That's it for him. He ain't even good enough to just sacrifice at this point. I hard switch into Tolly on a Water Pulse, which doesn't confuse, and then Tolly is able to take out Celio with the Slash, which is probably what I should have did anyways, but oh well. Next up is the inferior Water Type Pokemon, Crawdaunt, who hits a Crab Hammer after taking a Slash, and then I just decide that I don't want to risk Tolly to a crit, and I switch back into Garrus. Garrus ends up not getting Intimidate off on Crawdaunt due to Hypercutter, and Crawdaunt ends up going for Taunt, which pisses off Garrus, and he ends up hitting a Thunderbolt to take out Crawdaunt. Last and certainly not least is Kingdra, and this is where things get absolutely screwy. Garrus hits a T-Bolt on Kingdra, which does very little damage as Kingdra goes for a double team, and it begins. I switch Garrus out in exchange for Caden, who could do more damage with Ice Beam, but Kingdra hits another double team. Caden's actually able to hit this Ice Beam, however, and it brings Kingdra down to half as Kingdra claps back with a Water Pulse. That doesn't do a whole lot to Caden and doesn't confuse. Caden then responds with another Ice Beam that takes Kingdra all the way into the red, and then Kingdra goes to sleep with rest. Not only does he get fully healed, but he's also healed with a Chesto Berry, which is actually a great strategy that I use later on in this playthrough. You'll see that later. Caden then hits another Ice Beam that does barely any damage to Kingdra, and then Kingdra hits another double team. Caden then hits another Ice Beam through the double teams, and then Kingdra responds with a Water Pulse that doesn't do a whole lot of damage even though it crits. Caden's Citrus Berry ends up proccing to bring him back up to 89 health. And then Caden ends up missing an Ice Beam as Kingdra goes for rest once again. Like I said, it's getting screwy right now, and I'm not very happy about this at all. Caden misses a bunch of attacks here. He does get an Ice Beam, and then Kingdra wakes up, hits one right back. And then Caden ends up hitting another Ice Beam that crit, but then Juan ends up healing with a Hyper Potion, and Caden ends up missing an Ice Beam, so I switch into Tolly, and Tolly's getting chipped down with Ice Beam as well. And I'm running out of options at this point as I go to Shepherd, who ends up going for a Protect, then a Dig that misses. Then I go to Garrus. He can't get many hits on this Kingdra. Kingdra goes back to sleep, and I'm getting very frustrated at this point. And I just end up speeding through. Chakwas does hit a Blizzard, but then Kingdra rests again. And this is just exasperating at this point. It's just a whole stall fest, more or less. But then I end up coming up with a great plan as Kingdra runs out of attacking moves. And at this point, all of my mons are either in the yellow or in the red or the deep red. So this is kind of risky, but I end up switching Caden in, and I end up just getting a bunch of barriers up so that when Struggle starts hitting, he doesn't get hit hard. And he actually froze Kingdra for a second, and I start chipping him down with Acid, but then Kingdra dethaws. And all he can use is Double Team now, as Caden just chips away at him with Acid. And then Kingdra finally runs out of Double Team. But now I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with Struggle. Struggle will definitely kill Kingdra, but it could also kill Caden if it ends up critting, even with the +6 barrier. This can be avoided if Caden hits an Acid, which he doesn't. But then Kingdra hits Struggle, and it ends up only doing 4 damage to Caden. He lives off of 3 HP as Kingdra just knocks itself out with Struggle, and I get through one of the most exasperating battles that I've ever had in any Pokemon game. Good lord. Now, as annoying as that battle was, what if I told you that there was another battle in this run that was just as, if not more, exasperating than that one against Juan? Just keep on watching. So we have all 8 gym badges after that, and now we have to battle Wally in Victory Road, which I completely forgot about, by the way. Wally leads off with his Altaria, as I lead off with Garrus, completely forgetting about this battle. He does drop Altaria's attack, however, with Intimidate, but I have to switch Garrus out in exchange for Caden. Altaria then just puts up a safeguard, which I'm not too worried about at all, as Caden just hits an Ice Beam, which is quite effective against Altaria, and he is able to one-shot that big cloud bird dragon thingamabobber. Next up is Gardevoir, who of course threatens with Psychic, so I have to switch out and to Tolly, who would resist the Psychic, but Gardevoir just ends up going for a Future Sight as Tolly is able to get Gardevoir all the way in the yellow with a Crunch. Gardevoir goes for a double team, and now my PTSD is kicking in, but Tolly is able to hit another Crunch to take out Gardevoir. Now let's talk about Future Sight for a second. After Gen 4, Future Sight no longer affected Dark-type Pokemon. Well, in Gen 3, it sure as hell did, and it hit Tolly really hard, over half actually. So I have to switch Tolly out now, which I was planning on doing anyways against Roselia, as I switched into Caden, and then Roselia hits a Magical Leaf on Caden, which actually crits. So, not a huge issue, but still, as Caden ends up hitting an Ice Beam on Roselia, which takes it below half, and now Roselia will end up clapping back with a Leech Seed, which is going to do very bad things to that Roselia, because if you remember, Caden has the Liquid Ooze ability, which damages Pokemon when it comes to draining moves. Wally has to use a full restore on Roselia as Caden hits yet another Ice Beam on Roselia. I'm saying Roselia a whole lot, you can cope and cry about that, but Roselia's down all the way into the yellow, and then he ends up taking more damage from Liquid Ooze that doesn't quite kill. So now Wally switches out Roselia in exchange for Magneton, and luckily I didn't try to use Acid or anything like that. I instead go for Ice Beam once again. That does a little bit of damage, but it's not very effective, and Magneton gets hurt thanks to Liquid Ooze and Leech Seed. I end up switching Caden out, however, into Shepherd, and Shepherd ends up tanking a Thunderbolt completely since it's not affected by it, and then goes for a 4 times effective Mud Shot to take out Magneton. Good deal right there. Wally brings out Roselia once again, which does threaten with Magical Leaf, and even though Shepherd probably does outspeed Roselia, I'm not going to take any chances as I bring Gyarados out now, who gets an Intimidate on Roselia. And Wally just goes for full restore, so I really could have gone for Mud Shot or something like that. But alas, I'll settle for a bite from Gyarados as Roselia hits a Leech Seed. And unfortunately, Gyarados doesn't have Liquid Ooze, although Intimidate's a pretty great ability to be honest with you. So, Roselia gets healed back up. Gyarados goes for a super resisted Thunderbolt, which was absolutely stupid of me to do, as Roselia just goes for a neutral Magical Leaf on Gyarados. So now, realizing that I'm not going to do nearly enough damage to take this thing out with Gyarados, I decided to switch him out once again, this time in exchange for Chakwas, who comes in on a Toxic that ends up missing. I mean, Wally's actually gotten better as a trainer, it seems like. I get a Fake Out for some Chip and then a Blizzard on Roselia to finally take this annoying ass thing out. Thank the Lord, because Blizzard is only 70% accurate, so I'm just thankful it actually hit. Last out for Wally is his Delcatty, and this thing is super easy to take care of. I do hit a Thief on Delcatty just because, and then Delcatty hits a Sing. So, now I'm just slightly annoyed as Chakwas takes a nap, and I end up switching her out in exchange for Shepherd, as Delcatty just goes for a Feint Attack that actually doesn't do too much damage at all to Mr. Shepherd, and the commander goes for a Mud Shot, which takes Delcatty all the way down to the yellow and also reduces her speed, not that it matters anymore, as Delcatty just goes for a Charm, like that's gonna do something. Shepherd finally finishes the battle off with a Mud Shot, and we deal with Wally pretty easily, although it did get a little bit annoying, but not nearly as annoying as the Wand battle. So now we get a couple more encounters before we hit the Elite Four. First we get a Barboach, who I end up naming Grunt. And with Swampert on the team, I don't really plan on using Whiscash, but I do absolutely plan on using this Pokemon right here. It's a Spheal who I catch in Shoal Cave, where I could have got much earlier, and I end up naming him Rex. And even though he just now joined the team, Rex is going to be imperative for the Elite Four, and is going to play an absolutely huge role, just you wait. So, I finally decide my team for the Elite Four, and it might actually surprise you who gets left off. I go with Anderson the Relicanth, who I haven't used at all so far up to this point. We have Rex the Walrein, who I hadn't used up to this point at all either, but he's going to be huge for us, no pun intended. We also have Chakwas the Ludicolo, who knows Ice Beam, Fake Out, Giga Drain, and Thief. Caden the Tentacruel, who knows Barrier, Ice Beam, Waterfall, and Acid. And then Tolly the Sharpedo, who knows Earthquake, Crunch, Agility, and Surf. And of course, Commander Shepard, who knows Earthquake, Protect, Dig, and Surf. I'll explain the team later, but let's get into this first battle against Sydney. He leads his team of Creatures of the Night with his Mightyena, and I lead with Captain Anderson, who gets intimidated due to Mightyena's Intimidate ability, of course. Duh. Mightyena leads things off with a Sand Attack that makes things a little bit dicey here, but Anderson's able to hit a double edge on the first turn, and there's no damage done to Anderson due to Rockhead, as Mightyena claps back with a Crunch that does about a third, and then Anderson misses his second double edge. Mightyena goes for another Crunch that takes Anderson all the way down to below half, and drops his special defense as Anderson misses another double team. But his Citrus Berry procs now, so I can actually afford to keep him in if I really wanted to. But I don't want to risk a crit, so I decided to switch out Anderson in for Tolly. And Tolly ends up tanking a Crunch pretty well, being a Dark type herself. And then she claps back with a huge Earthquake to Mightyena, which ends up taking out the puppy. As expected, his next Pokemon is going to be Cacturne, who threatens with Needle Arm, so it's only right that I switch over to Dr. Chakwas. Cacturne just goes for Cotton Spore on the first turn he's out, however, which lowers Chakwas' speed. Then Chakwas hits a Fake Out to do some chip to Cacturne, and this would have been a perfect time for a Rain Dance as Chakwas gets hit with a Needle Arm and claps back with an Ice Beam that ends up taking out Cacturne due to a critical hit. And I completely wasn't thinking about Swift Swim at all here as Sydney comes out with Absol. So I switched Chakwas out for Shepard as Absol just hits a Swords Dance, which makes it a little scary. But Shepard outspeeds Absol and hits an Earthquake. That just completely one-shots Absol. Absol is a very, very frail Pokemon. Next up is Shiftry, who doesn't actually know any Grass-type moves, so isn't as much of a threat as Cacturne is. But I still switch back into Chakwas as Shiftry hits another double team, and my PTSD is hitting heavy right now as Chakwas hits a Fake Out, and then hits an Ice Beam to take Shiftry down, and that leaves Sydney with just one Pokemon, his inferior Dark Water type, Crawdaunt. As much as I'd love to bring Tolly in here to get the better of its inferior counterpart, it's only right that I have Chakwas hit a Giga Drain to take it out, and win the first battle of the Elite Four. Besides, Phoebe has a bunch of ghosts for Tolly to chew on anyways, as she leads out with a Dusclops, and it's time to let Tollyzora let her rip. Dusclops does go for a Protect on turn number 1, and I probably should have just gone for an Agility, but it really doesn't matter because Tolly one-shots the Dusclops with a Crunch. And then next up is Bayonet, who Tolly once again one-shots with a Crunch. But next up is Sableye, who is a Ghost Dark type, so Crunch isn't going to do nearly as much. And Sableye goes for a double team again, so my PTSD is hitting once again, especially when Tolly misses her second Crunch and Sableye hits a Shadow Ball. Tolly then hits another Crunch to take Sableye down, so my worries are a little eased. But now our second Dusclops comes out as Tolly comes out with another Crunch that doesn't quite kill. And then Dusclops goes for an Earthquake that may have had a roll to kill Tolly if it crit, but I don't think so, but still would have hit hard. As Dusclops eats a Citrus Berry, but Tolly is finally able to take out the big Ghosty with another Crunch. Last out is Bayonet, but same old story. Tolly is able to take her out with another Crunch, and Tolly has completely swept Phoebe with that. So now it's time for a Glacia sweep with Shepard, and this is actually the reason I wanted to bring Liara to the Elite Four. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, so now we just have to depend on Shepard, who's able to one-shot Celio with an Earthquake. Next up is Glalie, as Shepard just hits a Protect to try to see what Glalie's doing. It's going for an Ice Beam, but Shepard's able to hit an Earthquake that doesn't quite kill Glalie, and then Glalie hits an Icy Wind to lower the speed of Shepard. That shouldn't be a big deal as Glalie uses a full restore and Shepard claps back with another Earthquake, which takes Glalie all the way down back to the red. Shepard goes for another Protect as Glalie just misses an Ice Beam because of it, but now Glalie outspeeds, hits Shepard with an Ice Beam, and freezes Shepard. This is just peachy. So now I have to switch Shepard out, and I go into Rex, who knows nothing but Ice-type moves, so this should go swimmingly. One big regret of this whole run is not teaching Rex like Body Slam or something. An Ice Beam only does 9 damage even with a crit, so Glalie switches over to Crunch as Rex hits back with an Ice Beam to take out Glalie. Next up for Glacia is going to be her second Celio, so now I switch Rex back out for Anderson, and Celio just sets up the Hail, which does a little bit of chip damage to Anderson, who ends up going for an Ancient Power, just fishing for an Omni Boost, but to no avail, as Celio claps back with a very, very, very strong Blizzard that actually crits Anderson all the way down to 76 HP. Anderson just goes for another Ancient Power as Celio gets taken out, but damn, that was scary. Next up for Glacia is her Wall Rain, so it's time to switch Anderson out after some more Hail Chip, and I end up switching into Tolly to possibly hit an Earthquake here, as Wall Rain just goes for Surf. That does way more damage than I thought it probably should due to a Water type, but Tolly's special defense isn't very high, to be honest with you. Tolly ends up hitting an Earthquake on Wall Rain that actually ends up critting, but it doesn't end up taking it out, which I really needed it to do, as Wall Rain goes for a Body Slam that ends up proccing Rough Skin, and now the Hails stop, so maybe now an Earthquake might actually take this thing out. Is what I was thinking before I realized that Glacia already used her heals, so now Wall Rain gets taken out with another Earthquake, and now Glalie's out, but I don't want to risk Tolly to anything, so I just switch back into Rex, as Glalie hits an Ice Beam that's tanked very, very well due to the Ice typing and Thick Fat as well. Glalie just goes for a Hail as Rex ends up hitting Glalie with an Ice Beam, and it does decent enough damage. But now Glalie goes for Shadow Ball, which does a little bit more damage than Ice Beam was doing, but then Rex claps back with an Ice Beam. That takes Glalie below half as the Hail continues to fall. And now Glalie hits another Shadow Ball that actually crits this time, but then Rex goes for an Ice Beam that takes Glalie all the way down to the red, and this is where I realized that I was completely wrong about her not having another heal even during the recording. She has one more full restore that she just didn't use on her Wall Rain. Interesting. Rex ends up going for a rest just to heal back up, and I actually take a play out of Juan's book, and I end up giving him a Chesto Berry. So now, Glalie and Rex are both at full health, and now they're going to trade attacks once again, as they just keep going back and forth. But Rex is doing way more damage to Glalie than Glalie's doing to Rex, and Rex finally outlasts Glalie, and we've defeated Glacia. So now our final Elite Four battle is going to be against Drake? Drake? The guy who's out as good a Dragon Trainer as Lance? Anyways, his Shelgon almost always goes for Protect turn 1, so I just have Caden set up a barrier. And now Caden is about to go to town on this team as he hits an Ice Beam on Shelgon, which one-shots him. And then he also one-shots the Flygon as well, which I was kind of worried about because of Earthquake. I don't have to worry about him anymore though. Sorry Flygon HG. Next up is Drake's Altaria, who I'm kind of worried about, but at the same time not really, because guess what? Another Ice Beam should be good enough to take this thing out as well, and it is. And look, another thing to bring up my PTSD. It's a Kingdra. Last time we had to battle one of these things, I didn't have a good time at all. Caden ends up hitting an Ice Beam, as now Kingdra's going for Dragon Dance. But I'm not really worried about Dragon Dance too much, even though it'll outspeed now. As long as this thing doesn't crit, I'll be okay. And I'm going to take my chances here as Caden hits another Ice Beam. And now Kingdra's going for Body Slam here, which does a decent amount of damage and paralyzes Caden. But Caden is a tough son of a gun. He goes for another Ice Beam that takes out Kingdra. And now Drake's last Pokemon is Salamence. And he gets an Intimidate drop, not that it matters. And even though Tentacruel is a super squishy Pokemon, with Barrier, Caden's able to hold on and hits an Ice Beam through Paralysis to take out Salamence, and Caden has successfully swept Drake. Tentacruel might have just become one of my favorite Pokemon now. Let me know in the comment section which Tentacruel did better, Undyne in my last video, which you can check up in the top right corner, or Caden in this one. So now it's time for the battle against Wallace, the champion. There can only be one superior water trainer here in Hoenn, and it's certainly not Juan, but we're gonna find out who's better between me and Wallace. Let's get this bread. Wallace leads things off with his Wailord, and I decide to lead in with Aquas. Knowing a Giga Drain isn't going to take him out, it'll take two of them. I end up going for a Fake Out to do a little bit of chip. Then I end up going for a Giga Drain that actually does more damage than I thought it was going to do to this Wailord. But Wailord ends up just going for Rain Dance, which helps Aquas out a whole lot. Not necessarily against Wailord because it already outspeeds. And Aquas is able to hit a Giga Drain to take the Wailord out anyways. So now Wallace sends out his inferior Tentacruel, who isn't as good as Undyne or Caden. So I decided to send out Caden for a little Tentacruel duos out here. His Tentacruel goes for a Sludge Bomb, but this is really just me trying to pivot into a different mon. And I go to Tolly, but then Tentacruel goes for a Sludge Bomb again, which was really not what I planned on happening. And it would have just taken her out if it crit, but Tolly lucks out, hits an Earthquake on Tentacruel, and his squid is gone. Next up is his Ludicolo, who definitely pales in comparison to Aqua's, and that's why I decided to switch out, because the Tentacruel duos didn't go my way, but I already know the Ludicolo duos well, as I come into a Giga Drain that's really light, Aqua's hits a Fake Out to flinch Ludicolo and do some chip, and then she goes for an Ice Beam that does pretty good damage to Ludicolo off of a crit, and it freezes. But because Wallace has way better luck than I do, his Ludicolo almost immediately unfreezes and then hits a Giga Drain that brings him back into the yellow. And then Aquas hits another Ice Beam to bring him back down to the red. And why is everybody going for a double team? I'm tired of it. Stop. All of you, stop it. I switched Rex in, and now Wallace heals his Ludicolo with a full restore, and his Ludicolo outspeeds as well, and hits a Giga Drain that I thought would do neutral damage because of the ice typing, but apparently not. But Rex ends up hitting an Ice Beam on the Ludicolo that is neutral, but freezes again. Ludicolo actually stays frozen this time, as Rex misses an Ice Beam this time, and then I end up just setting up the hail on the very next turn. He stays frozen on the next turn, and so Rex hits a Blizzard, which at this point I believe is 100% accurate in the hail, and he ends up taking out Ludicolo. And next up is Whiscash, the inferior water ground type Pokemon, and hail pelts him as he comes in. So I switched Rex back out for Aquas, as Whiscash just goes for an Earthquake that doesn't do too much, but it does take Aquas under half, as hail continues to fall and ends up pelting both Pokemon. Aquas ends up going for a Giga Drain that doesn't completely heal her, but it does completely take out the Whiscash with a critical hit that probably didn't even matter. So now Wallace is down to his last two Pokemon. Now y'all remember when I told you there was a battle that infuriated me just as much if not more than the Juan battle did? Well, you're looking at that battle right now, ladies and gentlemen, because this Milotic ends up being a complete pain in my fat black butt. I have to speed this up because of how long it takes. I mean, this battle in and of itself took me about 20 minutes to take care of, and that's just because I had to speed up through most of it. The Milotic itself took me 11 of those in 20 minutes. I mean, it was just an absolute slog taking care of this thing because my man just kept trying to heal and because of other things as well. I didn't teach Rex anything outside of ice moves, outside of Rest and Hail, and I didn't really have anything super effective outside of Giga Drain, but at this point, Aquas was so damaged by the thing, and I was so scared of Ice Beam, that I basically ended up resorting to Toxic and PP stalling Milotic out of all of its moves, because Ice Beam, Surf, Toxic, and Recovery is such an annoying moveset to deal with. Caden ends up stalling him out and getting the kill due to Toxic not doing anything to him. And our last out is Gyarados, so we're not even out of the woods yet. I'm just so fed up with this battle at this point that I end up hitting an Ice Beam on the first turn as Gyarados goes for Dragon Dance. Once it goes for Dragon Dance the first time, I'm just done. I'm Toxic stalling this thing. Caden survives an earthquake somehow. Then I switch into Shepherd after an ice beam. Gyarados goes for a random ass surf, and it doesn't even matter. Gyarados is now all the way down. All I gotta do is hit protect one time. Gyarados hits a hyper beam that probably would have taken out Shepherd if I didn't teach him protect. And Gyarados falls to toxic damage, and I'm the champion just like that. Y'all can cope and cry about toxic stalling or whatever. I was just so annoyed. I was so fed up at that point. So we did end up winning the Elite Four and beating the champion completely deathless. Now, the reason I put Relicanth on the team instead of Gyarados is because people from Flygon HG's community kind of talked me out of putting Gyarados on the team because Gyarados isn't as useful supposedly in the Elite Four in Emerald. So I decided to put Relicanth, and Relicanth really wasn't that useful, so I might as well just put Gyarados on the team. Now, I have won the run, but there is one final optional battle at the end of the game against Steven, and I'm just going to take him on just for craps and giggles, and just so Gyarados gets some redemption here. Steven leads with his Skarmory, and I end up leading with Gyarados, who's calibrated all the way up to level 78. Gyarados is actually taught the move Flamethrower right before this battle, which actually doesn't one-shot Skarmory. And there's where I realized that I completely foobarred the entire plan, as Skarmory hits Toxic, and I just now realized that I didn't give Gyarados a P.E.K.K.A. Berry. He ends up taking out the Skarmory in the next turn, but I have completely just foobarred this entire fight at this point. Out next for Mr. Steven is going to be his Claydol, as Gyarados takes even more toxic poison damage, and now I gotta switch him out to make sure he doesn't get clapped by this Claydol. In comes Shepherd now, as Claydol just sets up a light screen, and Shepherd goes for a now resisted surf due to the light screen. It does less than half as Claydol hits back with an earthquake that actually does pretty solid damage to Shepherd. I ironically sheepishly go for a protect with Shepherd as he blocks off an earthquake, but really the plan there was just to stall out light screen turns as he hits another surf, and now Claydol sets up a reflect and Steven heals him up with a full restore. Lovely. I go for another protect, but obviously it fails, but now light screen's done, so now surf hits Claydol above half instead of below, and now Claydol goes for an earthquake, and this one does pretty good damage as Shepherd hits another surf to take out the Claydol. Next up for Steven is his Aggron, but this thing has absolutely no special defense pretty much, so one more surf is able to take him down, and just like that, we're halfway through Steven's Pokemon. Next up is his Cradily, and now that Reflect is out, I'm going to switch Shepherd out and go to Caden, as Cradily hits a Giga Drain, which does neutral damage, and because of Liquid Ooze, does a little damage to Cradily as well. Caden claps back with an Ice Beam, and that ends up doing pretty solid damage to Cradily, but then he goes for a Confuse Ray on Caden, which isn't great at all. So now I switch Caden out, not trying to lose him, and I go into Chakwas, who comes in on an Ancient Power that thankfully does not get an Omni Boost, as Chakwas goes for a Fake Out, and on the very next turn, Chakwas goes for an Ice Beam to take out Cradily, and now Steven's down to his last two Pokemon. His penultimate Pokemon is going to be Armaldo, so now I switch into Rex on an Aerial Ace that does very, very little. Rex claps back with an Ice Beam that does quite a bit actually, over half, as Armaldo goes for an Ancient Power that actually does big damage to Rex, and quite possibly would have killed if it crit, but luckily Rex stays alive and hits one more Ice Beam to take out Armaldo. Last but certainly not least is Steven's Ace Metagross, so I have to switch into Gyarados, who's still poisoned obviously, and Clear Body basically negates Intimidate, and Metagross goes for Meteor Mash that does a chunk of damage to Gyarados, even though it's not effective. Gyarados then gets some Poison Chip done to him, fires off a Flamethrower into Metagross, but it does just under half as Metagross claps back with a Shadow Ball, and that probably would have taken Gyarados out if it crit. And I'm not trying to risk him on the next turn, so I switch Tolly back in. Metagross hits a Shadow Ball that does over half due to a crit, but because Tolly didn't get taken out, this one's all over, as she hits an Earthquake that's super effective and takes down Metagross, which wins me the battle and finishes up the run for me as well. Now, I've beaten Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, but this was actually the first time I've ever actually played through Pokemon Emerald in its entirety. I didn't play any of the Frontier or anything like that. I don't think I will in this playthrough, but all in all, this playthrough was a pretty big education on hardcore Nuzlocking in general, because if I don't risk a few crits here and there, I probably have a deathless run. And I already admitted that it took me 2 attempts to get this done. But overall, I had a lot of fun with it, and I think for the next one, I'm going to go back to Pokemon Fire Red, and once I get a better laptop or computer, I'll start doing some Gen 4 or Gen 5 runs as well. I've actually never played through Gen 5 in its entirety before, so playing Black and White and Black and White 2 would be great. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys enjoyed it, hit that like button, hit the sub button if you're new as well, turn your notifications on to join the notification gang. That way, every time I upload a video, you guys will be notified. And thank you guys so much. Let me know in the comments section who your MVP is for this run. And let me know what run you want to see next in any of the Gen 3 games. And I'll see you guys in the next one.